Ferrari fines Lewis Hamilton €2 million. Want to know why? This video is for you. If you want to find out what contract breaches led to this dramatic split and what pushed Hamilton to leave Ferrari, stay with us until the end. This video is made for you. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. The Formula One universe has been shaken to its core following the unprecedented leak of a clandestine audio recording that has exposed an explosive internal confrontation between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, an incident so volatile, so charged with emotion and aggression, that it has prompted Ferrari's uppermost management to impose a record-breaking internal disciplinary fine of €2 million on Hamilton. This is not just a penalty, this is a statement, an earthquake in a team already known for internal pressure, conflicting ambitions, and a deep obsession with legacy. The events that unfolded behind the walls of the Ferrari hospitality suite during the Japanese Grand Prix weekend have now burst into public consciousness like a fireball, igniting outrage, disbelief, and an avalanche of speculation. What the public saw that weekend was the typical facade: photos of drivers smiling during PR duties, calmly discussing tire strategy in media sessions, and walking through the paddock with their heads high and headphones on. But behind those carefully curated optics was a storm that had been brewing for weeks, if not months. Insiders have now confirmed that tension had been festering between Hamilton and Leclerc over a series of compounding issues: diverging development philosophies, inconsistent strategic calls, media-driven favoritism, and most significantly, a fundamental clash in respect and recognition. What had once been mutual admiration between a seasoned veteran and a hungry young ace had devolved into unspoken resentment and territorial friction. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Those closest to the team had sensed the temperature rising. Hamilton had reportedly grown increasingly frustrated with what he described as systemic indecision within Ferrari's upper engineering circle. His attempts to push for more aggressive aerodynamic updates and revised energy deployment strategies were often stonewalled. Leclerc, on the other hand, had begun to feel sidelined, claiming in private that ever since Hamilton joined, the team had become Mercedes 2.0. The culture of Ferrari was being diluted, he believed, reshaped by external philosophies that lacked the soul and identity that defined the Scuderia. The two drivers had stopped dining together. Their pre-race routines became carefully staggered. Team briefings, once collaborative, turned cold and transactional. A team built on passion had turned into a minefield of passive aggression and thinly veiled contempt. But no one expected it to erupt the way it did on that Saturday night in Suzuka. Sources within the Ferrari camp, speaking on the condition of anonymity, described a debrief room thick with tension. The session began with a standard technical review, but quickly veered off course. Leclerc reportedly became visibly agitated when his feedback on turn-in response was met with technical pushback, and he redirected that frustration toward Hamilton. What began as a disagreement over brake balance calibration turned personal with horrifying speed. Leclerc, his voice reportedly rising with each sentence, unleashed a tirade. "You walk around this team like you own it," he said. "You undermine the engineers, you ignore the sim data, you act like your name is worth more than the badge." Hamilton, known for his composure even in the harshest spotlight, didn't interrupt. He remained seated, hands clasped, eyes locked. Then came the final blow. "I still don't get it," Leclerc spat. 7 titles? Maybe it was never you. Maybe it was always the machine. The room fell still. Engineers, data analysts, strategy directors, nobody moved. Hamilton stood. Slowly, deliberately. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. Witnesses say he uttered just 3 words: "Say that again." Leclerc, defiantly unblinking, repeated it. Perhaps he didn't think Hamilton would react. Perhaps he underestimated what it feels like to poke at the core of someone who's built his entire legacy on rising above disrespect. Without another word, Hamilton stepped forward and shoved Leclerc violently against the wall. The punch followed immediately, a heavy, clenched blow that struck just below Leclerc's eye, reportedly causing a minor orbital bruise. The noise it made, flesh on bone in an echoing space, froze the room like a thunderclap. One of the performance engineers attempted to intervene but was pulled back by Hamilton's own race engineer, who, according to some accounts, physically blocked Hamilton from landing a second blow. Leclerc slid down the wall, stunned more by the moment than the pain. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence wasn't fear, it was shock. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was the unmasking of everything that had been buried. Ferrari's dual-leader experiment had combusted in the most public way imaginable, only hidden from the world by the walls that now seem paper-thin. The aftermath was swift but concealed, until now. Ferrari's leadership, blindsided, held emergency closed-door meetings. Legal advisors, human resources personnel, and even a psychological performance consultant were called in to assess damage control. At first, the goal was to contain the fallout, classify the event as a heated exchange, and move forward with a mandatory cooling-off period. But then the audio leaked. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. No one knows exactly how the recording escaped the vault. Some say it was a staffer seeking revenge after a contract non-renewal. Others believe it was an accidental sync with a cloud storage account. Regardless, the leak changed everything. Ferrari could no longer control the narrative. The voices on the tape are unmistakable. The tension, the aggression, the sound of the impact, it's real. The damage to Ferrari's brand is still being calculated. What is known is this: the team issued an internal disciplinary ruling against Hamilton less than 48 hours after the incident became public. A fine of €2 million was levied, not for the optics, but for what team sources described as gross professional misconduct. Hamilton's representatives, however, are said to be furious, arguing that the fine is not only excessive but hypocritical, given the provocation and the team's long history of tolerating intra-team conflicts. Behind the scenes, lawyers are reportedly reviewing breach of contract clauses and reputational protections. Leclerc, for his part, has remained completely silent. No public comment. No press availability. His Instagram went dark. A close family member reportedly said, "Charles isn't angry. He's hurt. He never thought it would come to this." Ferrari management has attempted to downplay the long-term consequences, claiming the issue is being handled internally with mutual respect. But nobody believes that anymore. Sponsors are rattled. Puma, Shell, and Santander have all requested private meetings to discuss reputational risk assessments. Rumors are already circulating that Liberty Media is monitoring the situation closely, worried about the broader impact on the sport's image. There's even talk of a closed-door FIA inquiry, which could result in additional fines or even suspensions depending on further investigation. For now, the two men who were meant to write a glorious chapter in Ferrari's history have become the center of a firestorm. Hamilton, the veteran with an iron legacy, now faces whispers of instability and regression. Leclerc, the heir apparent, finds himself painted not as a leader, but as a provocateur. Ferrari once again finds itself on the front page, not for innovation, not for victory, but for chaos. And the world is watching, not just the fans, but the entire motorsport establishment, because this isn't just about a punch. It's about what happens when two dynasties collide inside a house already on fire. Security had been dispatched within seconds. Panic swept through the hospitality unit, but it wasn't the frantic, loud kind. This was colder, sharper. The kind that seeps into every whisper, every glance, every silence that lingers just a little too long. Staff rushed to clear the corridors, and within minutes, Ferrari's media handlers locked down the entire perimeter of the team's motorhome. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Charles Leclerc, still flushed with rage and visibly trembling, refused all medical assistance, brushing off the team doctor with a glare that could cut through steel. A small bruise was beginning to form above his right eyebrow, not from a punch, but from a fall in the chaos, a scuffed elbow, a bruised ego, and a heart pounding with betrayal. Without a word to anyone, he grabbed his jacket, stormed out through the side door, and vanished into the night. Hamilton, meanwhile, was a different picture entirely. He wasn't angry anymore, he was wrecked. Breathing heavily, shoulders tight, fingers twitching slightly as if reliving the moment frame by frame, he exited through the back loading area of the hospitality unit, escorted by two silent team personnel. He didn't say where he was going. He just needed to disappear. And that's exactly what he did. He would not be seen again until dawn, when he returned with sunglasses on, a hood over his head, and the kind of silence that says everything words can't. Ferrari, for their part, made a single immediate decision: no statements, no press, no commentary. All driver media sessions were abruptly cancelled. Cameras were quietly escorted off the premises. External access to both Hamilton and Leclerc was cut. Inside the team, the communications division scrambled to contain the leak they feared was inevitable, while PR officials drafted multiple versions of a statement, none of which were ever released. It wasn't silence. It was paralysis. That night, behind heavily guarded doors, Frederick Vasseur convened an emergency crisis meeting unlike anything the team had seen in recent history. The room included only Ferrari's most senior decision-makers, executive board members, legal counsel, longtime Scuderia strategists, and a handful of key sponsors who had gotten wind of the altercation through their own media intelligence. Tension was electric. Voices were raised. Some demanded immediate suspension. Others went further, pushing for contract termination. "This is Ferrari," one executive reportedly said, slamming his fist on the table. "Not a schoolyard." But Vasseur remained stone-faced. Not passive, calculating. He listened to every argument, but he never once flinched. When the shouting finally died down, he spoke. "We are not throwing away one of the most valuable drivers in history because of a single incident, no matter how serious. But there will be consequences. And they will be felt." His solution was surgical, a €2 million internal fine, unprecedented in its size. Not public. Not performative. But deadly serious. The message was clear: Ferrari was not a playground, and even icons would be held accountable. The following morning, Vasseur summoned Hamilton to his private office. The meeting lasted only 18 minutes. There was no press, no entourage, no advisors. Just the two men who now carried the fate of the most famous team in motorsport on their shoulders. An insider described the atmosphere as ice-cold, not angry, but dangerous. Vasseur didn't yell. He didn't need to. His words were deliberate. "You are one of the greatest to ever touch a steering wheel," he began. "But greatness doesn't excuse recklessness. It doesn't buy immunity. What happened last night was unacceptable, not just to this team, but to the legacy you now represent." He paused, eyes locked with Hamilton's. "If anything like that ever happens again, your contract will be terminated. Not reviewed. Not negotiated. Terminated. You will not receive another warning." Hamilton didn't argue. Didn't defend. He didn't even blink. He simply nodded and spoke just once. "I lost control. But I won't let it happen again." Then he stood up and left the room, leaving Vasseur alone with the silence of what had just been narrowly avoided. Outside, speculation was already spiraling out of control. Fans noticed the cancelled appearances. Reporters whispered of a serious internal situation. The paddock was buzzing, but it wasn't until a 47-second audio clip surfaced on social media that the full scope of the storm began to take shape. The clip, sent anonymously to a high-profile motorsport journalist, spread like wildfire. It began with Leclerc's voice, furious and barely contained. "You're not even listening. You never do. You act like you own everything. Like the world owes you something." The room's acoustics echoed, amplifying the emotion. Then came Hamilton's voice, deeper, colder, measured but dripping with venom. "Don't push me, Charles. I've had enough of the games." Then, all at once, chaos. What followed in the clip was a rapid succession of thumps, raised voices, metallic clatters, chairs perhaps, or a table being shoved. It cut off just before the shouting escalated further. But that was all the internet needed. Within hours, it was trending globally. Thousands of clips, slowed down, analyzed, speculated upon. Theories exploded on Reddit threads, Discord servers, TikTok breakdowns. Was it just verbal? Was there actual physical contact? Did Leclerc fall, or was he pushed? Was this the beginning of the end for Ferrari's dream team? The silence from Ferrari only made it worse. Every second without a response was interpreted as confirmation. Drivers from other teams were asked about it during interviews. Most declined to comment, though one senior driver was caught off mic saying, "If that happened at Red Bull, someone would have been fired before breakfast." The paddock had turned into a pressure cooker of questions, and the heat was only rising. Sponsors began reaching out quietly, requesting private briefings. One major brand threatened to withhold marketing assets if the issue wasn't addressed transparently. Meanwhile, former F1 figures, some with grudges, some with agendas, took to the media, fueling the inferno. Nico Rosberg called it a symptom of deeper instability at Ferrari. Jenson Button simply said, "I've known Lewis for a long time. If it got to that point, something serious must have been brewing." Inside the team, trust was fraying. Engineers were being pulled into meetings with HR. Communication staff were working around the clock. Even longtime mechanics, those who had weathered decades of Ferrari's internal storms, said they hadn't seen anything quite like it. The rift between Hamilton and Leclerc wasn't just personal anymore. It was threatening to become structural. And once that happens, it doesn't matter how fast your car is, because if the two drivers inside it are at war, every tenth of a second becomes poisoned. And yet, through it all, Hamilton said nothing. Leclerc said nothing. Their silence, like twin monoliths on opposite sides of a battlefield, only heightened the drama. The fans were captivated, hooked. This wasn't just sport anymore. This was a saga. The kind of slow-burning, high-voltage storyline that people couldn't stop watching. Every look between them during practice sessions, every crossed path in the paddock, every handshake, or lack thereof, was dissected frame by frame. What happened in that room would become one of the most infamous moments of the modern era, not just because of the drama, but because of what it revealed, about ego, pressure, and the dangerous intersection between personal pride and professional duty. Two elite drivers, locked in a psychological battle that spilled into reality. And the world? Watching every second. The chain reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The moment footage of the post-race confrontation between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc began circulating, the atmosphere in Formula One shifted from high-stakes competition to full-blown institutional crisis. Within hours, multiple key sponsors began initiating behind-closed-door consultations with Ferrari's public relations and legal teams. These were not routine check-ins. They were urgent and serious discussions about liability, brand association, and long-term reputational fallout. Some of these companies had multi-decade histories with Ferrari, having built campaigns around the team's image of precision, discipline, and tradition. Now, those same executives were reportedly questioning whether they could continue aligning with a brand embroiled in an incident that was rapidly evolving from a team dispute into a global media firestorm. Executives from several multinational corporations demanded clarity on the internal disciplinary protocols being followed. Privately, there was talk that if Ferrari didn't make a public stance, either in the form of a suspension, fine, or internal investigation, certain partnerships could be reviewed for ethical compatibility. Others were more dramatic, reportedly preparing contingency plans to shift their motorsports budgets to less controversial properties. In today's hypersensitive brand environment, the optics of endorsing violence or unmanaged internal chaos were considered existential risks. What had started as a tense moment between teammates had escalated into a corporate nightmare with real financial consequences. Meanwhile, the fanbase exploded in outrage, disbelief, speculation, and fierce tribalism. Social media became an ungovernable battlefield. X, formerly Twitter, trended worldwide for 3 consecutive days with hashtags like #FerrariMeltdown, #TeamLeclerc, #HamiltonDeservesBetter, and #Scuderia Civil War. Instagram Reels and TikToks flooded the digital sphere with slowed-down replays, body language analysis, and lip-reading interpretations of the brief and volatile exchange. On YouTube, content creators rushed to upload 30-minute breakdowns filled with driver history, political context, psychological profiles, and even speculative legal commentary. The fan split was clear and ferocious. Hamilton supporters emphasized his history of composure, suggesting Leclerc's alleged provocations finally pushed him beyond a human breaking point. Leclerc loyalists, on the other hand, viewed the incident as a betrayal, an intolerable breach of sporting ethics, especially by someone with 7 titles who should, in their words, know better. Debate spilled into mainstream media outlets. CNN, BBC, and Sky News all aired segments analyzing the broader cultural implications. Experts weighed in on how Formula One's increasing drama-centric storytelling, fueled by Netflix and social media virality, might be encouraging combustible rivalries over calm, professional rivalries. Sports psychologists were brought into the conversation to explain how prolonged high-pressure environments combined with unresolved interpersonal tension could manifest explosively. Headlines ranged from Ferrari in freefall to "Has the Hamilton-Leclerc rivalry destroyed F1's greatest team?" Leclerc's response, or lack thereof, only intensified the atmosphere. Since the confrontation, he has gone almost entirely radio silent. His absence from the Thursday media day ahead of the Miami Grand Prix was noted by every journalist in the paddock. Ferrari's press officer, when asked for a reason, only offered a cold no comment. Sources close to the Monégasque driver have confirmed he has requested physical distance in all team interactions, specifically demanding separate seating arrangements during technical briefings and race weekend meetings. In a sport where intra-team cooperation is critical and drivers often rely on shared data, this was an unheard-of escalation. One insider described the environment as walking on a knife's edge, adding that team personnel were now afraid to be seen as taking sides, lest it affect their careers. The personal dynamic between the two drivers has reportedly degraded to a level described internally as functionally silent. Communication is said to occur only through intermediaries or via short, clipped exchanges over the radio. What was once touted as a power pairing meant to bring Ferrari back to championship contention has deteriorated into a standoff reminiscent of the most bitter team rivalries in F1 history. Gone are the PR-friendly photo ops and mutual admiration interviews. Now it's all hushed voices in hallways, sideways glances during garage prep, and avoidance at all costs. More disturbing still is the revelation that this explosion was not a spontaneous combustion, but the culmination of a months-long deterioration. A senior member of the Ferrari pit wall team, speaking anonymously, shared that tensions have been escalating since the season opener in Bahrain. In the post-race cool-down room, Leclerc allegedly accused Hamilton of undermining his authority within the team by lobbying engineers for setup changes without prior consultation. "You're trying to turn this car into a Mercedes," Leclerc was reported to have said, his voice sharp with frustration. Hamilton, never one to engage in dramatics, supposedly responded with a quiet but pointed comment, "I'm trying to turn it into something that actually wins." The room went silent, and from that moment forward, the relationship began its slow implosion. Team leadership failed to intervene meaningfully. Horner-like charisma wasn't enough to smooth over two titans with clashing philosophies and worldviews. The psychological fracture has bled into operations. Reports indicate that engineering groups within the team have begun functioning as loosely organized factions. Leclerc's loyalists, many of whom have worked with him since his debut, have moved onto their own internal radio frequencies, excluding Hamilton's side from certain procedural updates during practice sessions. Communication silos have formed, and what was once Ferrari's biggest strength, its unified engineering culture, has been irreparably compromised. At least one senior aerodynamicist, long considered integral to Ferrari's development cycle, has reportedly expressed intent to resign if the environment remains toxic and divided. Resource allocation, upgrade timelines, and even strategy briefings have been affected. One source suggested that dual development paths for the car are now being secretly considered, an admission that the team may no longer be able to optimize performance for both drivers simultaneously. The ripple effect hasn't gone unnoticed outside the Scuderia. Off the record, rival team principals have begun commenting. A senior figure from Red Bull allegedly told a Sky Sports journalist over dinner, "This is why you don't jam two alpha drivers into one garage unless they either love each other or fear the boss more than they hate each other." McLaren's internal debrief reportedly included a joking reference to Ferrari's civil war being our ticket back to the podium. Even Toto Wolff, who has always managed his words carefully in public, offered a cryptic observation in a post-race press scrum, "I know both men very well. This is what happens when pressure meets pride." Amidst all this, the FIA has maintained a tense silence. There have been quiet conversations about investigating whether any conduct breached the International Sporting Code, but no official statements have been made. Former drivers and pundits have taken to the airwaves with calls for intervention, demanding that Ferrari act decisively before the situation deteriorates further, or worse, endangers on-track safety. Within Ferrari itself, trust has evaporated. Some team members have stopped attending group dinners, citing tension. WhatsApp group chats have gone dark or split into cliques. PR handlers are said to be working overtime, attempting to contain leaks while crafting narratives that no longer resemble the reality inside the garage. Even longtime Ferrari legends, former drivers and team icons, have begun to weigh in publicly, with one saying on Italian television, "This team once stood for honor and legacy. What we're seeing now is chaos dressed in red." And as the circus moves to Miami, one of the most high-profile and media-saturated races on the calendar, the storm shows no sign of letting up. Every camera will be trained on the Ferrari garage. Every word, every gesture, every delayed handshake will be magnified, dissected, and broadcast to millions. The pressure is reaching a boiling point, not just for Leclerc and Hamilton, but for everyone wearing the prancing horse on their chest. Whatever happens next won't just define this season. It could redefine the legacy of the most historic team in motorsport. The FIA, often seen as a slow-moving bureaucratic machine, is anything but idle in moments like these. Behind closed doors, The governing body has already begun compiling internal memos and quietly initiating discussions with key personnel embedded within the Ferrari paddock. Though publicly they maintain a posture of monitoring the situation, the reality is far more intense. Sources close to the organization suggest that while the altercation between Hamilton and Leclerc took place off-track, outside the strict jurisdiction of the FIA's immediate sporting codes, the implications are too significant to ignore. Every whisper, every leak, every piece of footage, whether captured by security, fans, or team insiders, is being collected. What's at stake is not just a spat between two high-profile drivers. It's the integrity of a team steeped in legacy, and a championship campaign that is quickly unraveling. Ferrari has historically operated with an iron curtain surrounding its internal affairs. But that curtain is showing signs of tearing. Internally, the incident has sent shockwaves across Maranello. Engineers are reportedly choosing sides. Team briefings are described as icy, with communication between Hamilton and Leclerc virtually non-existent unless mediated by senior staff. Team principal Frédéric Vasseur is said to be working overtime, not on car performance metrics, but on psychological triage, deploying every resource available to prevent a total implosion of the Scuderia's operational integrity. Even Ferrari's HR department, which usually deals with logistics and contractual matters, is now involved in managing driver conduct, communications, and behavioral compliance. And it's not just the FIA or Ferrari watching. Liberty Media, the commercial rights holder for Formula One, has a vested interest in how this plays out. The sport thrives on drama, but implosion at the top team? That's a nuclear scenario. Broadcast partners are pressing for behind-the-scenes access, social media engagement is peaking, and fans are divided in tribal warfare. One side chants for Leclerc, the loyalist, the golden boy raised within the walls of Maranello. The other rallies behind Hamilton, the global icon who came to Ferrari not to support, but to conquer. Every press release is dissected like a state document. Every glance between the two drivers during interviews is analyzed by body language experts online. Every silence is louder than any radio message ever aired. The whispers surrounding the FIA's next move are growing louder. While no formal investigation has been announced, insiders suggest that an informal integrity review may already be underway. This would allow the FIA to probe for any underlying breaches, anything from security protocol violations to threats to team safety. If either driver is found to have endangered personnel, or if psychological evaluations reveal unfit states for competition, provisional suspensions could follow, not as punishment, but under the guise of preserving sporting integrity. That level of regulatory intervention hasn't been seen since the explosive fallout of the 2007 McLaren espionage scandal. But make no mistake, Formula One history has shown time and again that when the stakes are this high, nothing is off the table. Ferrari, in a rare moment of vulnerability, has not confirmed nor denied the presence of psychological counselors for both drivers. But internal sources suggest that at least 2 mental health professionals have been seen entering and leaving Ferrari's private hospitality unit throughout the weekend. Leclerc is said to be deeply shaken, not by fear, but by a profound sense of betrayal. For him, Hamilton's arrival was initially met with cautious optimism. He expected a challenge, not a coup. He thought he'd be tested, not eclipsed. Meanwhile, Hamilton, though outwardly composed, is reported to have cancelled multiple off-track appearances, including a private dinner with key Ferrari sponsors in Milan and a charity gala in Monaco. Those close to him say he's entered what they describe as a lockdown mode, immersing himself entirely in mental recalibration and simulator work, rarely engaging with the outside world except through a tightly controlled inner circle. Insiders also reveal that tensions began simmering long before this latest public flashpoint. Subtle digs in team meetings, conflicting preferences in car setups, contradictory feedback in debriefs, it was all building. Hamilton's demand for engineering autonomy clashed with Leclerc's insistence on traditional Ferrari hierarchy. Hamilton viewed the structure as outdated, Leclerc saw it as sacred. That philosophical divide has now manifested into a psychological war, one that Ferrari's existing infrastructure seems ill-equipped to manage. As for the garage, the once unified atmosphere is now split by an invisible fault line. Mechanics who once shared jokes across both sides of the garage now keep to themselves. Pit wall meetings are shorter, more tense, and increasingly interrupted by passive-aggressive remarks or complete silence. A special partition was reportedly requested by Hamilton's camp to separate his pre-race prep zone from Leclerc's. That request, though denied by team management, sent yet another tremor through an already fragile dynamic. And in this sport, where milliseconds define legacies, that kind of internal friction is poison. Every session from now on feels like a lit match hovering near a leaking gas pipe. It's no longer just about lap times or tire strategies. Every move on track is layered with meaning. Every overtake attempt between the two is a statement. Every missed breaking point a possible act of retaliation. Fans are no longer watching just for the championship. They're watching for the collapse, for the explosion, for the breaking point. The narrative has shifted irreversibly. And now, the ultimate question looms, pressing down on Ferrari like the weight of its own history. Not whether Leclerc and Hamilton can collaborate. Not whether they can respect each other. That dream has evaporated. The only question that matters now, the one being asked in quiet corners of the paddock, in hushed meetings at the FIA, in emergency Zoom calls from Maranello to London, is this: can they even finish the season without one of them walking out, or being forced out?